Hello everyone, welcome back. So I did the very first of these 100-Year War. What video was that? Of course, and I can't see it. Why would I be able to? And I can't move this. Oh! You get out of the way. So anyways, I did this one here. Let's just click on it. Okay. Really?
1453.
Really? Battle of Kris. I did it some time ago, and then I asked if everyone wanted me to continue doing it. No one said anything. And then in the comment section, someone said, "When are you going to keep doing the 100 Years War?" All right. So here I am doing it. I'm going back to this one. And I know the last one was Kings in General. So we're going to roll with it. Let's go.
In our last video on the 100 Years' War, we covered the 1346 battle at Kris, during which the outnumbered army of Edward III of England had destroyed the magnificent French force of Philippe VI, widely seen as the best military force on the continent. In the wake of this great campaign, the English king will pass the baton of command to his prodigious son, Edward the Black Prince. A chivalrous and brilliant yet brutal military commander, the Black Prince would meet the French at the second great battle of the 100 Years' War, the Battle of Poitiers in 1356. The sponsor of today's video, Manscaped, changed our life, and we know it can do the same for you. Recently, we were able to upgrade from Lawnmower 2.0 to 3.0, and although it's hard to believe, they actually managed to make kings at manscaped.com. It's a whole new Bulls game.
Bulls game.
Following the glorious victory of Edward III at Kris and his capture of Calais a year later, the English, who had once been the most timid of all the uncouth races, were now considered by Petrarch as the most revered warriors of Europe. Nevertheless, such glory didn't pay Edward's bills, and the war's massive cost convinced the king to withdraw from the continent and return to England after the Truce of Calais was agreed on September 27, 1347. Returning as a victorious conqueror, he celebrated the Kris campaign with a tournament including all of the monarch's notable prisoners, displayed to all Edward's subjects as a mark of prestige. Over the Channel in France, the mood of Philippe VI and his subjects was entirely different. In December, the Valois king was castigated by his Estates General in Paris for his humiliating defeat and wasn't allowed to raise taxes. However, the shock defeat and prospect of capitulation to the English forced France's proud aristocracy into agreement. Together, they would fund a great invasion of England to end the war for good. Orders were immediately issued and preparations began. By the start of 1348, a new fleet was under construction, and local officials had begun assessing towns and villages for the coming levy. It seemed as though full-scale war was about to resume. However, an apocalyptic twist of fate was about to ensure that this would never happen: the Black Death. The deadly Yersinia pestis, which previously decimated the Byzantine Empire from the 6th to 8th centuries, originated in Central Asia and in the early 14th century proliferated east and west on the medieval Silk Road until it reached the Golden Horde. Its Khan, Janibeg, besieged the Black Sea city of Kaffa in 1346, but the plague began annihilating his army, and he ordered that diseased corpses be catapulted into the city. By the time besieged Italian citizens began fleeing west by sea to Europe, most of them were infected or dying. First appearing in Italy near the end of 1347, the nightmarish Black Death entered France through its thriving Mediterranean ports and then spread north like a wildfire until it reached England in mid-1348. It was the greatest demographic crisis in European history. Untold thousands perished, from the highest noble to the lowliest peasant farmer. The agrarian economy fell apart, and the tax base collapsed. Overall, it is estimated that a third to half of Europe might have been killed by this first wave of the plague. Many on the continent believed that the world itself was ending. By 1350, the resulting shortage of men and money from
there was a lot of stuff to read there. I was kind of browsing through. I was looking for numbers. Does anyone know what this plague, the death count was? I could look it up. I'm not going to, and I'll forget immediately after this video. But I'm just curious if anyone knows. I know it's in thousands, but I'm going to guess it had to be more than that. Population clearly wasn't like it is now. So thousands could be millions, in today.
The first plague wave stalled the war for the foreseeable future.
Not like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Like 100,000 back then could have been 1 million now. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Future, as both realms tried to recover from the disaster. In late August of that year, King Philippe VI died, leaving the devastated plague-ridden kingdom to his son, the Duke of Normandy, who took the throne as Jean II. If that wasn't bad enough, a fleet of French-allied Castilian mercenaries, which had been threatening Edward's trade with Flanders and link with Gascony, was beaten by the English at Winchelsea. With the exhaustion of both England and France, back-and-forth diplomacy was the order of the day, while at the same time Edward's countrymen continued to intervene in the ongoing small-scale action of the Breton Succession War. In 1353, the English king announced that he was willing to abandon his claim to the French throne in return for all of Aquitaine, as his ancestors had ruled it, Normandy, and suzerainty over Flanders. Jean II accepted the terms at first, but reneged soon after, possibly having been playing for time. The war finally flared up again when England began correspondence with the maverick King of Navarre, Charles II the Bad, who, as a snubbed grandson of Louis X, had an even greater claim to the French throne than Edward.
There's just so much. Everyone's all related. It's just amazing.
Emboldened by his new English ally, Charles felt confident enough to act against a hated enemy, the Franco-Castilian Constable of France, Don Carlos de la Cerda. King Jean II had given him the great county of Angoulême as a fief, lands which Charles considered his personal property. Hungry for vengeance, Charles had the constable lured into one of his own estates in Normandy, where the unfortunate victim was hacked to death. The Navarrese king then proudly proclaimed, "Know that it was I who, with God's help, killed Carlos of Spain." Jean II was furious that his favourite had been slain, but that was overruled by his fear of encirclement by Edward III and a disgruntled ruler of Navarre with a good claim to the throne of France. Aiming to resolve the dispute, the French and Navarrese kings made a tentative peace in 1355, but it was clear that Charles wasn't satisfied. Seeking to take advantage, Edward III decided to resume military operations now that the worst effects of the plague had receded. Also at the start of the same year, prominent members of the Gascon nobility sailed north to attend the birth of their king's son, Thomas. They had brought bad news and asked for assistance. Ever since 1352, Edward's hereditary lands in Gascony had been under continuous attack by the French king's lieutenant in the southwest, Count of Armagnac, Jean I. The incursions had made such progress that by May of 1354, Armagnac forces were encamped only a few days' march from the region's capital, Bordeaux. The understrength Gascons needed help, so the English king ordered his son, Edward of Woodstock, to raise an army and sail to southern France. The Black prince and his 2,700 professional English troops arrived in Bordeaux in September 1355 and absorbed a further 4,000 Gascon reinforcements there. At about the same time, the French king ordered a general mobilization of forces. It wasn't in time to save the south of his kingdom. Around October 5th, the Black Prince's army departed Bordeaux on what would become known as one of the greatest chevauchées ever launched. Marching in 3 parallel columns to maximize destruction, the raiding force went 100 miles south before swinging east, crossing the River Gers and entering Armagnac territory. There, Edward's army began mercilessly slaughtering every living creature it came across, torching everything that would burn and smashing everything that wouldn't, to ensure that this land would not assist the French war effort for years to come. His foe, the outnumbered Count of Armagnac, remained in fortified Toulouse as his enemy passed by, watching as they forded 2 nearby rivers and arrived at Carcassonne on November 2nd. That city attempted to bribe the Black Prince with 250,000 gold coins, but he responded by ravaging its suburbs before moving on, reaching Narbonne on the Mediterranean coast by the 8th. After desolating its entire outer city and agricultural hinterland, the Prince of Wales's army withdrew back towards Gascony, shadowed by, but not challenged by, 2 smaller French armies. Whilst only suffering minor casualties, this great raid had destroyed over 500 settlements, drastically reduced Jean II's tax revenue, and doomed his military reputation.
Why didn't the French attack? I mean, they didn't have a big enough force, but was he hoping that, okay, he's getting that out of his system, now we're going to be fine? Or was he just not wanting, allowing him a little bit of rage, but not wanting to provoke it into a full-on war, especially if he's in France? You know, he would probably rather fight that war in England so he could pillage and destroy just like he's doing here.
With his soldiers billeted along Gascony's northern marches, the Black Prince occupied the winter with administrative and governmental matters in the duchy, dealing with...
Sorry. When I said he wanted to fight that war in England, I don't mean the Edward the Black Prince. I meant the Jean II, the French king. He wanted to fight. He's not going to want to torch his own land. That's what I meant. Sorry.
With friendly feudals and internal disputes within the Gascon lands. While he was doing this, both sides embarked on small-scale military expeditions, taking and retaking castles. The French are said to have retaken 30 fortifications during this time. The level of success that the first chevauchée enjoyed, and fresh reinforcements from England and from new allies in North Gascony, made it clear that a second assault into the French lands would be undertaken.
Now, do those things on the horses, are they to, is it some kind of protection so they don't get shot with an arrow or something like that? Like, just, I'm guessing like a kind of a thick cloth. That's what it looked like. There might be some, I can't think of the word. That metal sheeting,
The prince departed northeast from Bergerac with his army on August 4th, 1356, arriving first at Périgueux and then Ramefort, Brantôme, Quisse, Nontron, Rochechouart, and
chainmail. That's what it was. Is there any chainmail in that? I'm sure it's to protect the horse, clearly, so horse gets taken out, then, you know, you got to find a new horse.
Terre, all within 10 days of setting off, despite once again leaving a swathe of destruction in its wake. When the Black Prince's army reached Bellec on August 16th, it was ordered to do no damage at all, as it belonged to a noble related to the English royal family. After leaving Bellec, the English started to encounter more French resistance, as the population began to fight back. Nevertheless, on the 24th, Edward reached Issoudun, but failed to take the fortified city.
if you're living there and you hear what they're doing, they're just ransacking the land, destroying stuff. Yeah, you got to fight back. At least put up some kind of protection enough to where they're going to say, it's not worth it. We'll just go over this way. Hey! They might just say, we'll just bypass it. We're not going to deal with that. Of course, you also put up resistance and they might take it offensive and then just slaughter everything in sight. But you got to go out fighting.
Moving on after razing its suburbs. 4 days later, as the army was nearing Vierzon, a flying column of 200 raiders skirmished with a French reconnaissance party and took a few prisoners. From them, they learned that to the north, Jean II was rallying a massive army and was about to march against the Black Prince.
John II. Did I call him Jean II? I think I did. That's John II's the French king. And I think I called him Jean. Am I mixing people up? I'm sorry.
To see why Jean had been delayed so much, we'll have to turn back the clock a bit to early 1356, where events in the north of France were considerably impacting the situation. Since his tenuous peace with the French king, Charles the Bad had managed to pry even more concessions from the monarch by intentionally spreading rumours that he was going to flee to Edward III, thereby increasing Jean's desperation to keep him in line.
Jean.
However, this time, the Navarrese king pushed his luck too far, as his amiability with the French Dauphin, Charles, made King Jean paranoid that they were plotting to overthrow him. So in April 1356, the French king stormed into Rouen with his men, beheaded 4 supposed conspirators, and imprisoned Charles. This led to an alliance between the latter's brother Philippe and the King of England, which in turn gave Jean the excuse he needed to confiscate Navarrese holdings in northern France. On July 12th, he began trying to take them by besieging the town of Breteuil, a move which locked the king in place, with greater threats materializing to the north and south, as the Black Prince was preparing another destructive chevauchée, while Normandy itself was invaded by Henry, Duke of Lancaster. This was designed to split French attention more than anything else, and after resupplying a few of Philip's besieged castles, Lancaster went to Poitiers in order to continue his distraction tactics. To his credit, at this critical juncture, King Jean II acted decisively. After a month of his pointless siege of Breteuil, he realized that events in the south desperately required his immediate attention, and concluded the siege by paying the Navarrese to surrender. With that done, the Valois king marched to Chartres and called his nobles to service. The Prince of Wales learned of this during the 3 days his army remained in plundered Vierzon, and realized he was about to be chased. Knowing that he had to get back to friendly territory as soon as possible, Edward immediately started withdrawing west along the Cher River, but was delayed for 5 days in a siege at Romorantin, and a further 4 days waiting for the Duke of Lancaster's unsuccessful attempt to link up with him. All of this gave Jean's army the time it needed to catch up with the Black Prince's plunder-laden forces, and by the time the latter reached La Haye, his army was only a day's march behind. Rather than coming up behind the English, Jean, using his better knowledge of the area, decided to remain east of the Vienne River and then cross at Chauvigny with a cavalry-heavy portion of his army. When the prince learned he'd been overtaken on the 16th, he tried to march off-road to evade Jean, but an encounter the next day between outriders at La Chaboterie made it clear there was no real chance of flight. The battle was inevitable. Edward's army camped for the night in a nearby forest. They emerged the next day and seized a hilltop position about a mile in front of the French, who had spent the night camped in battle formation. Compared to the great medieval hosts which had done battle at Crécy a decade earlier, the armies facing off near Poitiers in late September 1356 were small. perhaps due to the effects of the plague and war exhaustion. Edward of Woodstock's previously retreating chevauché army was made up of just over 6,000 troops, 1,000 mainly spear-armed Gascon infantry, 3,000 English men-at-arms, including mounted knights and their squires, and just over 2,000 Anglo-Welsh longbowmen wielding their infamous ranged weapons. These troops were divided into 3 mixed divisions of 1,500 soldiers each on the left, right and in the centre, while about 1,000 remained in a rearguard reserve. Opposite him, the French king's magnificent army had 3,000 infantry and 8,000 mounted knights, but the majority were ordered to dismount due to Jean's fear of a second Crécy taking place. Only an elite contingent of several hundred remained on their steeds. The French cavalry and crossbowmen were on the right, commanded by Marshal Arnoul d'Audrième, while manning the left were some Franco-German cavalry and more missile units under Marshal Jean de Clermont. The majority of dismounted knights and peasant infantry were arrayed in 3 central lines of battle, one in front of the other. They were led, from front to back, by Charles Dauphin of France, Philippe, Duke of Orléans, and King Jean II himself, respectively.
I would love to have just gone in time, and I've said it before, just to witness one of these battles. It's got to be so brutal.
As the two armies faced off,
it's probably a statement I would regret, like 10 minutes into the battle, when I would see somebody get, stabbed right through the neck. I'd be like, yeah. That's when you regret it, because you've already eaten a lot of popcorn and you know you're going to throw it all up now. Because that guy's sword and that guy's neck just ruined all the fun for you.
A French cardinal rode to the Black Prince, begging him to listen, and was met with the frosty response, "Say it quickly then, this is no time for a sermon." The prelate argued for a peace for the sake of all the Christian lives which would be wasted should the battle break out. Despite his hostility, the prince was still anxious about fighting a pitched battle, and was willing to make significant concessions. Unfortunately, Jean II demanded unconditional surrender, and so battle became the only way out. As the French commanders Audrième and Clermont surveyed the English position, they saw an unusual amount of movement and believed the enemy to be retreating. It was in fact probably an intentional ruse. Not willing to let the enemy get away, Audrième charged with his cavalry towards Warwick's left, while Clermont reluctantly took the same action, heading towards Salisbury's right. The former's well-armoured knights and horses initially resisted English arrow fire and crashed into the English infantry, inflicting significant damage on the first line. However, when longbowmen advanced up the riverbank anchoring their left wing and began to loose volley after volley into Audrième's flank, the attack turned into a massacre. French knights were either felled by arrows, crushed by their own steeds, or routed, while the marshal himself was made a prisoner. On the other side of the field, Clermont's horsemen charged up the ridge towards Salisbury's division, but were funneled into a narrow open section in the hedge protecting the English line. There, the bunched-up cavalry suffered terrible losses before breaking through, and when they did, they were engaged by Salisbury's dismounted knights. After a fierce clash, the French were thrown back. The French infantry vanguard under the Dauphin followed behind in good order along the entire front. However, they too were forced to funnel themselves through the hedge's gaps, and many were killed by devastating arrow fire whilst doing so. Those who broke through met the Anglo-Gascon men-at-arms in vicious hand-to-hand fighting, which lasted 2 hours, but they were finally pushed back with heavy losses and nothing to show for it. As the Dauphin's forces had been defeated, King Jean II ordered that his son be escorted from the field in case of a disaster, but it turned out to be a disastrous move. The Dauphin's withdrawal convinced the Duke of Orléans, who led the second line of infantry, to leave the battlefield with the troops in that formation as well. Advancing with a battle axe in hand, Jean II led the largest and final division, crossbowmen in front and infantry behind, up the ridge towards the English. With the Black Prince's archers running out of arrows, the French king's contingent closed with the English almost unscathed, with his most elite knights and the fresh 3rd Division outnumbering the nevertheless stubborn and high morale army of the prince. When the archers ran out of arrows, they left their positions and took up swords, knives and axes, joining their comrades in the melee. At the combat's fiercest moment, the Captal de Buch gathered 200 reserve cavalry and led them in a wide swinging arc around to the French rear. He raised the flag of St. George and then charged at Jean's rear ranks. Seeing this, the Black Prince withdrew some of his dismounted knights from the line, mounted them, and had an impetuous knight called Sir James Audley lead them to crash into the other French flank. The remnant of Jean's army scattered in every direction, a significant portion of them towards a marsh called the Champ d'Alexandre, where the English longbowmen slew many of them. In the chaos, the King of France was surrounded by enemy soldiers who demanded his surrender. He refused to give himself up to common soldiers, but then the Earl of Warwick rode through and formally took Jean prisoner. All in all,
I thought he was going to die fighting, but I'm glad that the Duke kind of came up and alleviated just a useless death on top of what was, I mean, that last charge was just a useless charge to me. I understand why he did it. It just wasn't needed.
While the English suffered minimal losses, probably around 100 or two, the French had lost at least 2,500 dead, including Clermont and many other nobles. Around 3,000 were also taken prisoner, including the French king himself, who was led to the Black Prince with full medieval honor. France suffered another disaster, and now its king was hostage. However, the 100 Years' War was just beginning, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button.
I see there are only, considering it's a 100-year war, there was only 7 videos. So I'm hoping that this series has just started. Or it was a 100 Years' War and there wasn't a lot of fighting. It was just like a Cold War. A lot of hostility, but rarely any fighting. I don't know. And we're also talking, what, 700 years ago? So, yeah. Probably light on a lot of information. Well, I don't know. We have a lot of information, so I shouldn't say that. I'm going to end this here. Like and subscribe. Till next time. Have a good day. Have a good night. And thanks for watching.